Once you have shifted to a place and settled down there,
Loss, death, bereavement, grief. These are very hard to say or hear words.
Okay, so I'm Vardhan, friend of Sanjay.
Namaste. Today's episode of the show is a special episode. And initially, I had written something uh, to talk about the guest of the evening, but I decided to instead do something else. But before I reach my guest, I'd like to introduce to you our moderator for the evening, that is Vardhan Dharkar. And a very quick introduction. Vardhan worked in the corporate sector as a finance head for several years before he decided to quit and pursue his passions. And his passions are very diverse, uh, from learning Sanskrit to reading Bhagavad Gita to traveling and photographing. In fact, the calendar behind him that you see, that's the calendar that where he has used his own photographs on the calendar, and also cooking. So that's Vardhan Dharkar for you. He is our uh, moderator for the evening. Now, I decided to use the blurb, excerpt from the blurb from the book of our guest for the evening. Loss and love, trauma and transformation, mourning and meaning, cry and celebration, and pain and purpose are existential co-pilgrims. This is the book. All of you can see this. This is the book, her book. And and from the same book, I would like to read a few lines about her introduction. Neena is first and foremost a mother, a meaning-inspired person, and scholarly practitioner. Neena is a grief and growth specialist, counselor, and expert companion. She runs an independent library movement for underserved children. Uh, Neena has mentioned in her book a lot of places that it's the summary for me was that grief and growth, grief and joy are they are coexistential. They exist in all our lives, and the human spirit is resilient enough uh, to 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 come out of the trauma of the grief of loss or bereavement and grow. She had been a grief counselor for 8 years, 7 years or 8 years, when she lost her elder son in 2014, and he was only at 22 at the time. And yet, she found it within herself. She also needed a professional therapy, and she found it within her to grow, to come out of it. So that's Neena Verma for you. And now I'll move out of the frame and let Vardhan and Neena take the evening forward. Over to you, Vardhan.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjay, for your warm introduction and your eye for details. You spotted the calendar. So, uh, welcome and namaste to all our viewers in Bharat, that is India, and outside of India. And welcome to the show. And as Sanjay mentioned, our guest today is very special and very distinguished. And today we will learn a lot from her and from her journey itself. So, Nina, if we can begin our conversation.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As Sanjay mentioned about this book, Grief, Growth and Grace, the book that you have written. When I started reading this book, I thought it's a book which, and that was my expectation, it's a book written by a professional counselor. But as I started reading it and kept on reading it, I found that it is a book maybe which is not written actually by a professional counselor, but by a mother who has suffered a terrible tragedy and a personal crisis. And that makes this book very special and meaningful for everyone else to read and understand how this crisis can be handled. Because this is one crisis which everyone is going to face at some point of time in life, whether he likes it or not. In fact, we can say that this is one rule for which there is no exception. Everyone is going to have this problem. So my first question would be to request you to share with our viewers the personal loss that you suffered, the consequences, the pain you had because of that, the grief that you suffered, and the path you created for yourself to come out of that crisis and become more stronger and better person than what you were.
Thank you so much. First of all, namaste and good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, in whatever part of the world. We are logging in from India, 5 p.m. this evening. Thank you so much to Sanjay ji and Vardhan ji for this gracious opportunity to talk about this very complex, very important, and unfortunately sorely neglected work, which is about grief. So you mentioned that it came across to you that the book was not written by the grief expert, but the bereaved mother. So honestly speaking, the book is written by the grief expert, who also happens to be a bereaved mother. As a grieving mother, this is the earlier book that I had written. This is my grief memoir. And you begin by asking me about my loss. So it is, I think, in 2006, towards the end of 2006, that I first began the grief and trauma work. And it just happened to me, not by design, but by chance. And initially, I was hesitant to take up that work, and I also declined because I felt like I was not specifically trained for grief work. I had a rich background in psychology and applied behavioral science, but the specifics of the grief psychology is what I was not trained in. So I hesitated, I declined work, but then the work persisted with me. And so, with much trepidation and nervousness, I did this. But then, one case after the other, I somehow felt that this is my calling. And I immersed myself deeply into this alongside my organizational change and leadership practice. And slowly and gradually, I started to feel that this is my calling until 2014 when my loss happened. And I realized why all these years, this kind of a, what should you call it, a premonition or maybe destiny preparing me for this journey of my own, that this work had been getting deeper and deeper into me. So 2014, September, so day after tomorrow, it will be exactly 10 years on the 24th since my son became eternity. 2014, when on the 24th, when we had our loss, thereafter my journey with grief became totally different. My understanding of this work, my approach towards this work, as you rightly said, when the loss is something that you have digested and metabolized internally, when it's something that becomes your own, then the way it comes out is also very different. And as Sanjay ji mentioned that I had tremendous difficulty finding a therapist for myself in India. Not that there are not any. I mean, we are such a largely populated country. I'm sure there must be many. But somehow I couldn't find one. And so in 2017, I decided that I would quit my organizational consulting and plunge myself fully into grief work. And yes, my personal loss, my personal grief journey has guided my work all through. However, before that has been the expert training that I have undergone, the very wise and expert mentoring that I have received from Dr. Robert Niemeyer and some other experts. But most of all, who I have learned from is the clients and the other people that I have got to work with. One of whom, fortunately, is today with us, Mona Bhatia. She's also gone through a profound loss in about a year and a half ago, not even half exactly. Some 15, 16 months ago, she's gone through a profound loss, which is the loss of a child. So these are the people I have worked with, the clients that I have worked with, the people I have volunteered for. Perhaps they have been my best teacher in this work. And yes, my loss, what specifically do you want to know? My son in biological age at that point in time was 22 years and 3 months.
Broadly, how did you handle that situation, and so that it will help our viewers?
To begin with, I could not handle. I mean, being the expert, but more importantly, being the woman of the house, the wife and the mother, I was doing everything that I needed to and I should have to keep my family together, to help them affirm and sail through this difficult journey. However, when it came to me helping myself, it's very, very hard to be your own therapist or to be your own client. So that is where I was literally coming apart, and I wasn't able to do much to help myself. And 2 years and few months down the line, all of a sudden, I was diagnosed, not because I went for that diagnosis, but some other blood test reports which came incidentally revealed that I had by then developed an explosively high type 2 diabetes. So when I say explosively high, it was really explosively high. I mean, nobody gets diagnosed all of a sudden overnight with a 12.7 HbA1c. This is almost fatal kind of a thing. And there was no external sign, no symptom. And why I've shared this is because despite my background, I went through this. And this is why I've taken this up. Thereafter, I took this up as my calling, that I have to make this work available, this service available, this sensitization to grief available and accessible and affordable. So I work on pro bono basis with many people who come from disadvantaged background because we all need this help. Maybe not all of us need this help to a professional extent, but we all need some support, some companioning. Some cases which are traumatic and complicated need more professional help. So when I was going through my journey, I realized that there has to be a way to fill this gap of, having more expert companions in the society. So apart from doing my therapy, counseling, and post-traumatic growth coaching work, I also started to teach those interested to develop, grief specialization. So it's a complex teaching, but, it's like my dream is that if we can have one grief sensitized person in every neighborhood, so that, this journey becomes, I wouldn't say easy, but a little less traumatic, a little more copable, a little more affirmable. And my word for that is affirm. Grief is to be affirmed. Grief is not something you suffer, because you don't suffer love. Grief is only cry of love. Grief is a dramatic expression of love. Since we do not suffer love, we're not suffering grief. We have to learn to live with it. Some griefs will never have any closure. Mona's grief perhaps will never have a closure. My grief will never have a closure. But we learn to live with it. We learn to digest it. We learn to let it get integrated on the timeline of our life. Yeah. Somebody needs to maybe mute.
I think, yeah, please continue.
Yeah. So I think I have said more than what you asked for. So maybe over to you for next question. This is a subject I tend to get verbose.
I think your experience is something which will really help viewers. Also, as you said rightly, that every one of us is going to face at some point of time a crisis like this. In a situation like this,
Sorry to interrupt you. Just to add one more thing to your question. I'm very sorry to interrupt you. You said, how did I, go through this journey? And I just mentioned about my sudden diagnosis with type 2 diabetes without any sign or signal or
Yeah.
symptom.
Yeah.
So for that, I would say that one thing that I would want our viewers to understand, and all those who will see this recording maybe later, is that we all know that heart is shattered in loss, trauma, grief, bereavement. We all know that, emotionally we are all disturbed, but very few of us recognize or notice that body and brain are perhaps, if not worse, just as hit. And body is something that keeps the score. Body suffers acute amount of trauma in loss and bereavement. Uh, we are two-thirds water, 70% water, our bodies. But in grief and trauma, we naturally tend to get dehydrated. Body tends to lose all of its natural water. So sleep obviously gets disturbed. You lose appetite. You find it very hard to, even look at food, forget about being able to eat. So one thing that I would encourage people to know is that please do take care of your body at least to a basic level. So minimal food. If you cannot have full food, maybe have 3 to 4 small meals, fruits, soup, anything other, which is semi-solid, solid, or semi-liquid, which you can easily digest. Movement is very important, whether you do it by way of some exercise, gentle exercise, not heavy exercise, or some gentle walk in the garden. Sleep may remain elusive. It does remain elusive, especially in the immediacy of the loss. But at least try to give yourself some rest. If the sleep doesn't happen, maybe use some other way, do some chanting or some, before sleep meditation, anything you could do. Do take care of your body. Drink a lot of water, not any other beverage, certainly not aerated beverage, but drink a lot of water. Maybe you could take lukewarm water. You need to keep your body hydrated. Eat in small bits, but do eat. And brain fog is a word which has become popular in the wake of pandemic. But honestly, grieving brain is terribly fogged. It's not uncommon or unusual to find people complaining about face in the crowd syndrome. You go in the market and suddenly you see somebody and you're dead sure, your brain is dead sure that this is your deceased loved one. Why? What is happening? Brain has developed its own neural network pertaining to that deceased loved one or the relationship. Overnight, those neural networks are not going to be erased. Brain needs a fresh programming. Until that programming happens, brain is looking for that person. And suddenly in the crowd, you see somebody and you have a strong, this feeling, intuitive feeling that you've seen your deceased loved one. Sometimes it has happened with people that people have gone to market and they've forgotten where they have come and why they have come. Some people in acute cases have also forgotten their way back home. This has particularly happened with bereaved mothers or survivors of traumatic and violent bereavement. So brain, please do take care of it. Do some crossword, do some gentle board game, read a bit, not heavy reading, but just gentle reading. Stimulate your brain, listen to music, do some meditation if you can. Take care of body and brain as much as you take care of your heart.
Okay, I think that will be really helpful.
Yeah.
One of the question I wanted to ask you is that in such situation, what is a role that close friend or close relative should play, and what is it that they should avoid doing?
Very important question, and I can never thank you enough for this question. Now, what happens is that not just in India, I work internationally as well. I've seen in various cultures as a society, not that we are not groomed, but actually we are very avoidant of talking about death, bereavement, grief. These are things that we bury under the carpet. What happens in the process is that despite our best intentions, most of us do not um, have the knack for basic grief sensitivity. So what happens is that, especially when the social mourners are visiting you, relatives, friends, neighbors, what happens is everybody has a need to register their presence. So they tend to ask you the same story, the griever, and it is right now the immediacy of the loss, the next few days. So you're still more in shock than grief. Grief has yet to start. You're more in shock. Now, what happens? In a day, 10 to 15, 20 times, you're repeating the same story.
Yeah.
There's no space or respite being allowed to your brain to breathe,
Yes.
to give itself some space to digest what has happened. Not even register, forget about digesting, not even register what has happened, right? So, and then some people tend to, with all their good intentions, maybe, tend to fill up the mourning space with too much of unnecessary chatter and noise. They would keep saying some cliches, platitudes, sermons like time will heal, oh, look at your other children. The worst thing that many bereaved parents get to hear from social mourners, particularly I'm talking of bereaved parents, but other grievers as well, is, oh, at least you have one more child. This is something that was told to me. Some other parents are told, at least you have two more children. Now, there cannot be something more brutal than this to land on. So, at least you have your mother. Somebody just lost father. At least you still have your mother. This at least and still. Maybe you're saying this with good intention, with a noble thought in your mind, but how's it landing? You can't even imagine how manifold the trauma of the just bereaved person will grow. And things like be brave, be strong, as if they will not be. Who else will manage their life if not themselves? They will have no option. Life will give them no option but to be brave and strong. But allow them some quiet space. So, what the others should do, when you do not know what to say, the best thing to say is not to say anything. Let your presence be felt through noble silence. If you really want to be useful and meaningfully, helpful, maybe very quietly, without being too noisy, very quietly do some practical stuff for them. Just watch over. Do they need some? Do they have something cooked in their kitchen when you're leaving? Have they taken some tea, some water, something? Do they have some groceries available? Do they have some help available? Do some other stuff for them, practical stuff, but quietly, without being too noisy. This is in the immediacy of the loss. Thereafter, also, when you meet him, if you do not know what to say, it's okay to be quiet. Let your presence speak. And when your presence speaks, when the griever is feeling your presence in a genuine way, perhaps they will open up to tell you what they need from you. This is what the society, the friends, neighbors should do. I have a request and appeal for the grievers themselves, which is like, that even you are also not programmed to handle grief. Maybe this is happening to you now, and then you're suddenly realizing that I lack basic grief sensitivity and basic grief wisdom. So extend that benefit of doubt and then that concession to others who are unknowingly perhaps being, unhelpful to you or harming you in some way. Just be forgiving towards them. And those who you think particularly will be helpful, there's no harm in you getting up and asking them for the precise and specific help that you need. If they help you, wonderful. If they cannot help you, that is also okay. Just forgive them. But no harm in you getting up and asking for help.
I think very important. The suggestions that you have given will be really helpful. Coming to your book, the title of the book is Grief, Growth and Grace. Now, generally people wouldn't achieve or correlate grief with growth. So I found this title to be very meaningful and very impactful. Maybe if you can throw some light on this title itself.
Thank you so much for asking this. So first clarification that I want to make is there's no two in between the three words. There's no and in between the three words. It is with a very deliberate design, much thought of between my editor and myself for several months, that we deliberately kept the three words as independent and yet intertwined. So there's no grief to growth. Why? Because as Sanjay ji in the beginning introduced also, that they are existential co-pilgrims. Grief does not require that, grief does not banish out post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth does not demand that first grief be done with, then only I will start. They can happen, and they do happen simultaneously. Sometimes the grief is not finding any closure for the rest of life, which is also fine as long as there are no pathological or medical complications which need professional attention. In which case, we should allow or seek medical attention or pathological professional attention, therapeutic attention. But otherwise, while the grief is still there, post-traumatic growth can start and does start unfolding. So that was the idea with which I created this title, Grief, Growth, Grace. They stand independent and yet are intertwined. So the first part of the book is actually devoted to grief, the first two chapters, which is where some people may find it more theoretical, because the book is actually intended for professionals as well as for self-help. Yeah. So professionals find it very useful. The first two chapters are devoted more on what is grief, the various nuances of the phenomenon of grief, and some people may even find it more academic. But I've tried to be conversational in the way I've written it, yeah, so that everybody can find some meaning and relevance in it. Second part is the heart and the mind of the book. It is the longest part, which is 7 chapters, is about post-traumatic growth, which is where I introduce a model that I have developed over years of my practice. It is a 6-aspect model called growth, where growth is an acronym, and it is grief affirmation, resilient adaptation, opening to the new reality, post-loss reality, way to well-being, transformation, and H is for harmonious re-emergence in life. The final part, the grace part, as you rightly pointed out, is more about more deeper existential work. So it begins with forgiveness. Many of us do not realize that loss and grief sometimes also bring along intense anger and some amount of bitterness or resentment as well. Sometimes secretly or unknowingly or invisibly, without articulation, that resentment or anger could be even directed at who we call God or supreme grace. So therefore, forgiveness is a very, very important part of the grief journey. So 10th chapter, which is actually the longest chapter of the book, third part, grace part, is all about forgiveness in the context of grief. And finally, of course, grace is gratitude, reverence for life, affirmation for life, compassion, and essence of life, which is meaning of life.
So very quickly, I am interrupting. Actually, Rohit has raised his hand. Rohit, it will have to be very quick because we are short on time also. It will have to be very quick. Probably the questions can come offline as well. And I'll forward those questions to Neena, and then she can
Just a quick question, sir. Just a quick question, because it just popped into my mind.
Yeah.
Ma'am, is it that you were most subtly referencing to the act of the subconscious mind in dealing with the trauma which leads to growth after certain period of grief?
This question needs more time than we have right now, because I'm also not very clear what exactly you mean by subconscious mind. This is a very misnomering word. Yes, unconscious has a large play. Personal unconscious has a large play. Collective unconscious has an even larger role to play, because it is through collective unconscious that we get to have our behavioral training. We have our social conditioning. So, with that also guides our individual response processes, individual response mechanisms.
Because as far as I have an understanding, ma'am, that our body also has a way of healing itself that is directly related to the activities of the brain and the body combined. And that correlation is what I was thinking.
Yeah. I think I would encourage you to connect offline, because this needs a very deep dive. As I have already shared, that brain has set neural networks pertaining to the deceased loved one. They will not get erased overnight. They need reprogramming, retraining. And until they are active, the deceased loved one is all around you.
Yes.
You're actively searching. And body is feeling discordant with this activity. So body is going its own way, and body mind, they tend to lose their deeper connection. This is why I say take care of both of them simultaneously.
Yeah. So coming back to your book, in the book you have propounded a model, the growth mandala.
Mandala.
Mandala. If you can explain what that model is, what are the elements of that model, and how can it help individuals reach that desired result?
So as I've already named the six aspects and the phases of growth mandala model. So before that, I will quickly also say why I use the word mandala with growth. It's because mandala coming from Sanskrit and it's popularized more by Buddhist practices. It's a Hindu concept as much. Mandala is a field of consciousness which represents both not knowing as well as knowing. Profound knowing as well as absolute not knowing. So it's a field of consciousness. So growth mandala, why I call it growth mandala, is because as we go deeper into the growth journey, which is the 6-aspect model, grief affirmation, R is for resilient adaptation, O is for opening to the reality, that is post-loss reality, emergent reality, and W is way back to well-being, and T is for transformation, and H is for harmonious re-emergence into life with a sense of meaning. So these 6 phases or aspects, you may call it, are actually all, they're non-linear phases. They don't have to happen necessarily in a chronological order. But most of us, we do begin somewhere with G, that is grief affirmation. Because until we allow ourselves to affirm our grief, when I say affirm, it's not about coping. It's not necessarily about acceptance also. Acceptance also doesn't happen overnight. It is also never absolute. You have accepted here, but then this part, the gut part, protests. So affirmation is about allowing the knowledge to settle into you that this loss is happening. And then allowing grief its space in your life and not running away from it. So grief affirmation is something where we all start. Resilient adaptation is the phase where some people move far more quickly. Why? Because all of us from nature's side are capable of helping ourselves in grief. Some people need professional help. Some people need a lot of professional help. But most of us are able to help ourselves. So those who are able to help themselves through grief affirmation, sometimes they come quickly to asking for help for resilient adaptation, whether through a professional or through a friend, or they help themselves. And then opening to the emergent reality is very important, because loss has not just taken away one person from your life. So many secondary losses have happened. Perhaps that person was the nodal point of all relationships in your life. Perhaps that person, the deceased person, I'll just quickly finish. Perhaps that deceased person was the provider of the family. He or she was the financial and social security provider. So many secondary losses have happened. So you need to come back and reconfigure yourself to all the secondary losses as well. So opening to the emergent reality. Anyone?
The growth mandala is what we were talking about, and the various aspects of that you explained so beautifully. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you is that after this, what next? Which is your next book? What is it going to deal with, and when can we expect it?
Thank you so much for asking this. So apart from grief, post-traumatic growth, I am equally a champion of and a deep expert in resilience and emotional well-being. So my next is on resilience, but on a broader spectrum of needs. So it is not just in the context of grief alone, but from everyday small hassles to the big life storms of life. They could be about some hardships, adversities, some non-death losses, trauma, or any other kind of thing, which calls for resilience. So this book is on resilience. I'm introducing 2 new things in this. One is a concept called resilience mindset. So I'm giving a proper, practical, livable explanation for that, definition for that, and also framework, which is like, prism. I call it prism of resilience mindset. So that's a framework for resilience mindset. But the books actually focus entirely is on the other model and other concept, which is the bigger concept, which is what I have named deep resilience. Deep resilience is a 4-aspect, 3-phase. So the 4 aspects, 3 are phases. 4-aspect model. Again, it takes resilience beyond the regular concept of resilience, which is bouncing back. It takes it way beyond that. It takes resilience to the level of higher purpose and greater growth, and then surrendering that greater growth in the larger service of the society and humankind. So this is what I call deep resilience. And this book has, let's hope, maybe 6 to 8 months. It will soon move into the editorial and the production work. So as it takes, book is over from my side. Editorial and the other subsequent publication level work will take the next 6 to 7 months maybe.
Okay. Before we conclude, I just wanted to ask you one question. Is that in Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, which is narrated by Sri Krishna to Arjun, and the reason why he narrated that was because Arjun faced grief on account of the losses or the killing that he would do, and that all of them will be his near and dear ones. And Sri Krishna then advised him how is that situation to be faced. Do you think that in that sense, Sri Krishna is the first counselor, and that book is something which really will help all of us in this journey?
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't know whether Bhagwan Krishna is the first counselor or not. Bhagwan Krishna is also an expression or manifestation of the ultimate Trinity, Bhagwan Vishnu. So who knows really whether he was the first? But he was definitely the most profound, Shri Krishna, the narrator. So yeah, Vishad Yog chapter is all about that. And in fact, it's my high dream if someday I can understand Gita to that level. And if I could interpret Gita or the relevant parts from it in the context of grief, I would surely love to write a book on that.
So thank you very much for your insightful discussion on this topic. And now let me hand over the proceedings to Sanjay.
So thank you so much, Neena and Vardhan, for such a beautiful talk today. I'm sorry for the technical glitches that had in between. I will be, clubbing both the videos together and sharing it on my YouTube channel as well, so that those who missed on the second part, they can view that also. I'll share the link as well of the YouTube channel, so that others can view it there as well. One thing which certainly resonated with me as well was when you spoke about, if you there's so much of chatter in case of a bereavement, and which is not probably, which is uncalled for, which is not required. Not, I'll not say uncalled for, which is not required. In my long life, I've had to attend many such attend to many such people. And what I found was that what was needed was only just that hug or touch, and just sit quietly with the person, and then the person in time would on his or her own open up to vent grief. And that was the best. I always intuitively felt that that was the best that I could do for the person. So I think...
so happy you noticed this. Instead of telling grievers time will heal, because time doesn't heal, we heal ourselves with time. Yes. Instead of saying these kinds of cliches to people, if social mourners could say that allow yourself time, and or not just say, actually allow them their time and space to connect with their grieving self.
Right.
Perhaps that would be far better than telling a griever time will heal.
Right.
Give them
So,
their time and
yeah.
space.
So thank you once again, viewers. Thank you, Neena. Thank you, Vardhan. And have a safe and enjoyable Sunday evening, all of you. Please do share or do like and subscribe to the YouTube channel where I'll be sharing this video as well. And looking forward to having you once again with us, Neena, and sometime in
Thank you
future.
so much.
Let us stay connected. Namaskar.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for the opportunity. Thank you to both
Thank
of
you.
you
Thank you.
and to the viewers. Thank you.